Hello, this is Hatchet, Chapter 6, read by me, Mr. O'Leary. I will again do this chapter in two parts. I'll be reading from page 56 to page 61, and then I'll pause and stop, and then I will do part two on a second video. Again, the reason for that is because sometimes YouTube won't allow videos that are too long. So instead, I'm doing them in two parts. So let's review. Brian is starting to understand nature more and more as the book goes on. He is getting motivated just like Perpich told him he should. In this chapter, Brian has success with two things. I guess you'll have to read and listen to see what those things are. So read on, my friends, and here we go. So on page 56, here we see Brian. He remembers his time in the woods with his friend Terry when he still lived back home. So that's how he's starting, with this memory of him and his friend Terry in the woods. 2 years before, he and Terry had been fooling around down near the park, where the city seemed to end for a time, and the trees grew thick and came down to a small river that went through the park. It was thick there and seemed kind of wild, and they had been joking and making things up. And they pretended that they were lost in the woods and talked in the afternoon about what they would do. Of course, they figured they'd have all sorts of goodies like a gun and a knife and fishing gear and matches so they could hunt and fish and have a fire. I wish you were here, Terry, he thought, with a gun and a knife and some matches. In the park that time, they had decided the best, top of page 57, the best shelter was a lean-to. And you can see a picture of a lean-to there on the page there. Was a lean-to, and Brian set out now to make one up. Maybe cover it with grass or leaves or sticks, he thought. And he started to go down to the lake again, where there were some willows he could cut down for braces. But it struck him that he ought to find a good place for the lean-to, and so he decided to look around first. He wanted to stay near the lake because he thought the plane, even deep in the water, might show up and to somebody flying over, and he didn't want to diminish any chance he might have of being found. His eyes fell upon the stone ridge to the left, and he thought at first he should build his shelter against the stone. But before that, he decided to check out the far side of the ridge, and that was where he got lucky. Under the sun and the fact that it rose in the east and set in the west, he decided that the far side was the northern side of the ridge. At one time in the far past, it had been scooped by something, probably a glacier, and the scooping had left a kind of sideways bowl back in under a ledge. It wasn't very deep, not a cave, but it was smooth and made a perfect roof, and he could almost stand in under the ledge. He had to hold his head slightly tipped forward to the front to keep it from hitting the top. Some of the rock that had been scooped out had, top of 58, also been pulverized by the glacial action and turned into sand, and now made a small sand beach that went down to the edge of the water in front and the right of the overhang. So as you can see from the picture here, that Brian, this isn't what Brian found, but this is the picture I found online. So he kind of found a rock that he could go under, and then he's going to build a shelter in front of it. It was his first good luck. No, he thought, he had good luck in the landing, but this was good luck as well. Luck he needed. All he had to do was wall off part of the bowl and leave an opening as a doorway, and he would have a perfect shelter, much stronger than a lean-to, and dry because the overhang made a watertight roof. He crawled back in under the ledge and sat. The sand was cool here in the shade, and the coolness felt wonderful to his face, which was already starting to blister and get especially painful on his forehead, with the blisters on top of the swelling. He was also still weak. Just the walk around the back of the ridge and the slight climb over the top had left his legs rubbery. It felt good to sit for a bit under the shade of the overhang in the cool sand. And now he thought, if I just had something to eat, anything. When he had rested a bit, he went back down to the lake and drank a couple of swallows of water. He wasn't all that thirsty, but he thought the water might help take the edge off his hunger. It didn't. Top of page 59. Somehow, the cold lake water actually made it worse, sharpened it. He thought of dragging in wood to make a wall on part of the overhang and picked up one piece to pull up, but his arms were too weak, and he knew then that it wasn't just the crash and injury to his body and head. It was also that he was weak from hunger. He would have to find something to eat. Before he did anything else, he would have to have something to eat. But what? Brian leaned against the rock and stared out at the lake. What in all of this was there to eat? He was so used to having food just be there. Just always be there. When he was hungry, he went to the icebox or to the store or sat down at a meal his mom cooked. Oh, he thought, remembering a meal now. Oh, it was the last Thanksgiving. last year, the last Thanksgiving they had as a family, before his mother demanded the divorce and his father moved out the following January. Brian already knew the secret, but did not know it would cause them to break up, and thought it might work out. The secret that his father still did not know, but that he would try to tell him when he saw him. Top of page 60. The meal had been turkey, and they cooked it in the backyard in the barbecue over charcoal with the lid down tight. His father had put hickory chips on the charcoal, and the smell of the cooking turkey and the hickory smoke had filled the yard. When his father took the lid off, smiling, the smell that had come out was unbelievable. When they sat to eat, the meat was wet with juice and rich, and had the taste of smoke in it. He had to stop this. His mouth was full of saliva, and his stomach was twisting and growling. What was there to eat? What had he read or seen that told him about food in the wilderness? Hadn't there been something? A show? Yes, a show on television about Air Force pilots and some kind of course they took. A survival course. All right. He had the show coming into his thoughts now. The pilots had to live in the desert, but they put in the desert down in Arizona or someplace, and they had to live for a week. They had to find food and water for a week. For water, they had made a sheet of plastic into a dew-gathering device, and for food, they ate lizards. That was it. Of course, Brian had lots of water, and there weren't too many lizards in the Canadian woods. That he knew. One of the pilots had used a watch crystal as a magnifying glass to focus the sun and start a fire, so they didn't have to eat the lizards raw. Top of page 61. But Brian had a digital watch without a crystal, broken at that, so the show didn't help him much. Wait, there was one thing. One of the pilots, a woman, had found some kind of beans on a bush, and she had used them with her lizard meat to make a little stew in a tin can she had found. Bean lizard stew. There weren't any beans here, but there must be berries. There had to be berry bushes around. Sure, the woods were full of berry bushes. That's what everybody always said. Well, he'd actually never heard anyone say it, but he felt that it should be true. There must be berry bushes. He stood and moved out into the sand and looked up at the sun. It was still high. He didn't know what time it must be. At home, it would be 1 or 2 if the sun were that high. At home, at 1 or 2, his mother would be putting away the lunch dishes and getting ready for her exercise class. No, that would have been yesterday. Today, she would be going to see him. Today was Thursday, and she always went to see him on Thursdays. Wednesdays was the exercise class, and Thursdays she went to see him. Hot little jets of hate worked into his thoughts. Pushed once, moved back. If his mother hadn't begun to see him and forced the divorce, Brian wouldn't be here now. He shook his head, had to stop that kind of thinking. And I am going to stop right there so I can stop part 1 of chapter 6. And then for the next video, you see part 2. So far we know Brian is looking for food, and he has decided that he's going to try to find berries. So let's see what he does with the rest of the chapter. And we'll see that in part 2.